The morning sun had barely kissed the horizon when Rosalie Durant stepped onto her porch and nearly stumbled when the boards held firm beneath her feet, no longer groaning their familiar protest of rot and neglect. She gripped the railing, which no longer wobbled in her hand, and stared down at the smooth planks that had been warped and splintered just yesterday. The hinges on her screen door swung silently, no longer screeching their rusty complaint with every opening. Someone had been here in the night, working while she slept, and the only stranger in Placerville, California, was the drifter cowboy who had ridden into town 3 days prior on a dusty paint horse, his hat pulled low, and his words even fewer. It was May of 1878, and the spring had been unusually dry in the Sierra Nevada foothills. The gold rush days had faded into memory, leaving Placerville a shadow of its former bustling self, though enough stubborn souls remained to call it home. Rosalie had been one of those souls for all her 22 years, raised by her father after her mother died of fever when she was just 7. Her father had passed 2 winters ago, leaving her the modest house on the edge of town, and little else. She had scraped by doing laundry and mending for the remaining miners and merchants, her hands perpetually raw from lye soap and her back aching from hauling water from the creek. She looked around the yard, searching for any sign of who had done this. Her gaze traveled to the small barn where she kept her single milk cow and a few chickens. The barn door, which had been hanging by a single hinge for months, now sat square in its frame. Her breath caught in her chest. The work would have taken hours, done in complete silence so as not to wake her. She had always been a light sleeper, alert to every sound since living alone, yet she had heard nothing. The drifter had made his camp just beyond the creek that ran behind her property. She had noticed him that first evening, watching the smoke from his small fire curl into the twilight. He had come into town only once, to the general store, where he had paid for supplies with coins from a worn leather pouch, and nodded his thanks without speaking. Martha Hensley, who ran the store with her husband, had told Rosalie that the man had the look of someone running from something, or perhaps towards something, though his eyes held no meanness. Rosalie descended the steps carefully, still marveling at their sturdiness. She had been saving what little money she could for months, hoping to afford the lumber and nails to make these repairs before the whole structure collapsed. Now someone had done it for her, expecting nothing, saying nothing. The thought brought an unfamiliar tightness to her throat. Kindness without expectation had been rare in her life. She went about her morning chores with distracted efficiency, milking Bessie and collecting eggs, but her mind kept returning to the silent stranger by the creek. By mid-morning, she had made a decision. She wrapped half a loaf of bread she had baked the day before, added some preserves, and a few strips of bacon from her meager stores. It was not much, but it was what she could offer. The walk to the creek took only minutes. The morning had grown warm, and grasshoppers leaped from her path as she made her way through the tall grass. She could see his camp ahead, a simple arrangement beneath a stand of oak trees. His horse grazed nearby, and he sat by the remains of his morning fire, cleaning his saddle with careful attention. He looked up as she approached, his hands stilling on the leather. He was younger than she had thought from a distance, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. His face was tanned from the sun and marked with a faint scar along his jaw. He did not stand or speak, but watched her with a wariness that spoke of a hard life. "I brought you something," Rosalie said, holding out the wrapped bundle. Her voice sounded too loud in the quiet morning. "For breakfast or whenever you are hungry." He regarded the offering for a long moment before setting down his cleaning cloth and rising to his feet. He was tall, she noticed, with the lean build of someone who spent his days in the saddle. He took the bundle from her hands with a slight nod, his fingers careful not to touch hers. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was rougher than she expected, as though he had not used it in some time. "I wanted to thank you," Rosalie continued, clasping her hands in front of her to keep them still. "For the porch and the door and the barn, you did not have to do that." He shook his head slightly, a gesture that might have meant it was nothing, or perhaps that no thanks were needed. He set the bundle on a flat rock near his bedroll and returned his attention to his saddle, clearly considering the conversation finished. Rosalie stood there, uncertain. She had expected something more, though she could not have said what. Perhaps an explanation, or at least a few more words. But the cowboy had returned to his work as though she were no longer there, his hands moving over the leather with practiced strokes. "What is your name?" she asked, the question emerging before she could stop it. He paused, and for a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he said, Adler Nash. "I am Rosalie Durant. This is my property, though I suppose you know that already." Another slight nod. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Finally, Rosalie turned to go, feeling foolish for lingering. "Your porch was dangerous," Adler said suddenly, his voice stopping her mid-step. "Someone could have gotten hurt." She turned back to face him. "Yes, I know. I was saving to fix it, but it takes time." He met her eyes then, and she saw something flicker in his expression, gone too quickly to name. "You should not have to lie like that." The words, simple as they were, struck something deep in her chest. She had become so accustomed to doing without, to making do, that she had forgotten anyone might think otherwise. "Thank you," she said again, more softly this time. "Truly." He gave a slight tip of his head, and she understood it was his way of saying she was welcome. As she walked back to her house, she could feel his gaze on her back, though when she glanced over her shoulder, he had returned to his work. The days that followed fell into an odd pattern. Rosalie went about her work, taking in laundry from the households that could afford it and mending clothes by lamplight in the evenings. Adler remained by the creek, a quiet presence she was aware of even when she could not see him. She did not see him in town, and the few times she walked to the creek to fetch water, he was either gone or kept to his camp. Then, 5 days after the porch was fixed, she woke to find her chicken coop had been reinforced, the gaps where predators had been stealing in now sealed with fresh boards. A few days later, the wobbly post of her clothesline had been reset, standing straight and firm. Each repair was done in the night, in silence, without announcement or request for payment. Martha Hensley mentioned over the counter at the general store that the drifter had been seen helping old Samuel Winters patch his roof, and that he had reset a wheel on the baker's wagon, all without asking for a cent. "Strange one, that fellow," Martha said, weighing out flour for Rosalie. "Helpful as can be, but will not say more than 2 words together. Ben tried to offer him work at the livery, but he just shook his head and walked off." Rosalie carried her purchases home, thinking about the silent cowboy who fixed things and expected nothing. That evening, she made a stew with vegetables from her small garden and some beef she had traded laundry work for. She dished out a generous portion into a pot, covered it with a cloth, and walked to the creek as the sun began to set. Adler was sitting on a fallen log, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. His horse stood nearby, and he looked up as she approached. This time, there was something almost like recognition in his expression, as though he had been expecting her. "I made too much stew," Rosalie said, which was not quite the truth but seemed easier than admitting she had made it for him. "I thought you might want some." He set down his whittling and stood, wiping the wood shavings from his trousers. "You do not have to feed me every time I fix something." I know I do not have to, Rosalie said, meeting his eyes. I want to. He studied her for a moment, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks under his gaze. Then he took the pot from her hands, his fingers brushing hers briefly. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled her hand back quickly. "Would you like to sit?" he asked, gesturing to the log. "I have coffee if you want some." The offer surprised her, and she found herself nodding. He poured coffee from a battered pot into 2 tin cups, handing her one before settling back onto the log with the stew pot balanced on his knees. They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee as the evening birdsong filled the air around them. "Why do you do it?" Rosalie asked finally. "The repairs, I mean. You do not ask for anything in return." Adler was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. He ate a few spoonfuls of stew, his gaze fixed on the darkening creek. "I like fixing things," he said at last. "Makes me feel useful. But you could ask for payment. People would pay you or at least offer you meals and a proper place to sleep." He shook his head. "Do not need payment. Do not need a proper place to sleep. This suits me fine." "Where are you from?" The question was bold, perhaps too bold, but she was tired of not knowing. His jaw tightened slightly. "Lots of places." "Are you running from something?" "No," the word was firm. "Not anymore." She wanted to ask more, to understand this man who appeared like a ghost in the night to mend broken things, but something in his expression stopped her. Instead, she said, "The stew is good, is it not?" A hint of something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "It is very good, thank you." They finished their coffee as the stars began to appear overhead. Rosalie knew she should go, that it was not entirely proper to be sitting alone with a man she barely knew as darkness fell, but she found herself reluctant to leave. There was something peaceful about his presence, something that eased the constant worry that had become her companion. "I should get back," she said finally, standing and brushing off her skirt. "You can keep the pot, bring it back whenever you like." Adler stood as well. "I will walk you back." "That is not necessary, it is only a short walk." "I know." He was already moving, falling into step beside her. They walked in silence through the grass, the night sounds rising around them. When they reached her porch, he stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Thank you for supper," he said. "Thank you for all the repairs," Rosalie replied. "You have been very kind." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture so old-fashioned and courtly it made her heart skip. Then he turned and walked back toward the creek, his figure fading into the darkness. Rosalie went inside and prepared for bed, but sleep was long in coming. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around her, and thought about creek-colored eyes and careful hands that fixed things in the night. The next day brought a surprise visitor. Rosalie was hanging laundry when a buggy pulled up to her house, and Judith Morrison stepped down, her green silk dress entirely too fine for a social call in this part of town. Judith was the daughter of one of the few remaining wealthy families in Placerville, her father having made his fortune in the mines and invested it wisely before the gold ran out. She and Rosalie had attended the same small school as children, but their paths had diverged sharply as they grew older. "Rosalie," Judith said, her smile as bright and false as polished brass. "I heard the most interesting story and simply had to come see for myself." "What story would that be?" Rosalie asked, pinning up one of her work dresses. "That you have a cowboy living on your property." Judith's eyes gleamed with something unpleasant. "A drifter, no less. People are talking, you know." Rosalie felt her spine stiffen. "Mr. Nash is camping by the creek which runs through several properties, not just mine. He is not living on my property." "Oh, Mr. Nash, is it?" "So you know him?" Judith moved closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Rosalie, you must be careful. A woman alone with a strange man so close by. It does not look proper." "There is nothing improper about it," Rosalie said, her voice tight. "He has been very helpful fixing things around town." "Yes, I heard about that too. One wonders why a man would do so much work for free unless he was hoping for something in return." Judith's implication was clear and ugly. Anger flared hot in Rosalie's chest. "If you have nothing kind to say, perhaps you should leave." Judith's smile grew sharper. "I am only trying to help as a friend. You know how people talk in this town. A woman's reputation is all she has, especially a woman in your circumstances." "My circumstances are none of your concern." "Of course not," Judith said, already turning back to her buggy. "I just thought you should know what people are saying. Good day, Rosalie." Rosalie watched the buggy roll away, her hands trembling with suppressed fury. She knew Judith had come only to spread poison, to remind Rosalie of her place in the town's hierarchy. But the words burrowed under her skin nonetheless. Was she being foolish? Was there something improper about accepting Adler's help, about bringing him food and sitting with him by the creek? She finished hanging the laundry with rough, angry movements, then went inside to work on her mending. But she could not concentrate, her needle stabbing the fabric with uncharacteristic clumsiness. Finally, she set the work aside and covered her face with her hands. A knock on the door frame startled her. She looked up to find Adler standing on the porch, her stew pot in his hands. He must have seen something in her expression because his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am fine," she said, rising and going to the door. She took the pot from him, their fingers brushing again. "Thank you for returning this." He did not move, still studying her face. Something happened. It was not a question. Rosalie sighed, suddenly exhausted. "Someone came by. Said people are talking about you camping so close, about me accepting your help. Said it does not look proper." Adler's expression darkened. "I will move my camp." "No," Rosalie said quickly, surprising herself. "No, please do not. I do not care what they say, but it is causing you trouble." "Judith Morrison causes me trouble just by existing," Rosalie said with more vehemence than she intended. "She is spiteful and cruel, and I will not let her dictate what I do." Something shifted in Adler's expression, a warmth that had not been there before. "You are sure?" "I am sure." She held his gaze, willing him to believe her. "You have been nothing but kind to me. I will not send you away because of gossip." He nodded slowly. "All right, but I will be more careful. I do not want to make things harder for you." "You have made things easier," Rosalie said softly. "Much easier." They stood there for a moment, the afternoon sun slanting across the porch between them. Then Adler said, "I am going into the hills tomorrow. There is a stand of timber about 2 miles north that has some good fallen wood. I thought I might bring back enough to build you a proper woodshed before winter." "Adler, you have already done so much." "I want to," he said, echoing her own words from the night before. "If you will let me." How could she refuse when he looked at her like that, with those steady eyes that seemed to see past all her defenses? "All right," she said, "but at least let me pay you something." He shook his head. "No payment." "Then you will have supper with me tomorrow night, a real supper at my table." "I insist." He hesitated, and she could see him weighing the propriety of it. Finally, he said, "All right, tomorrow night." After he left, Rosalie found herself smiling, Judith Morrison's poisonous words already fading in importance. Let people talk. She was tired of living her life according to their narrow rules. The following evening, Rosalie prepared the best meal she could manage with her limited resources. She made fried chicken, beans with salt pork, biscuits, and even a dried apple pie. She set her small table with her mother's good plates, which had not been used in years, and picked wildflowers to put in a jar in the center. Adler arrived as the sun was setting, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. He had trimmed his hair and shaved, and Rosalie felt her breath catch at how handsome he was when not hidden beneath trail dust and weariness. He held his hat in his hands, looking uncertain in the doorway. "Come in," she said, stepping back to let him enter. "Everything is ready." He moved into the small house carefully, his eyes taking in the modest furnishings and the carefully mended curtains at the windows. "It is a nice place," he said. "It was my father's," Rosalie told him, gesturing for him to sit. "He built it himself when he first came to California in 1849. He was a miner, though not a successful one, but he loved this place, and I do too." They sat down and Rosalie served the food. For a few minutes they ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, not awkward as she had feared. Finally, Adler said, "This is the best meal I have had in longer than I can remember." "Where have you been traveling from?" Rosalie asked, then quickly added, "You do not have to answer if you do not want to." "It is all right," Adler said, setting down his fork. "I came from Nevada, but before that, Arizona Territory. Before that, Texas, and before that, Missouri. That is a lot of traveling." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then continued, "I left Missouri 5 years ago. I was 21, thought I knew everything. My father had a farm, wanted me to stay and work it, but I wanted adventure, wanted to see the West." His voice held a bitter edge. "I saw it all right." "What happened?" "Got mixed up with the wrong people for a while. Nothing criminal," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "Just foolish. Spent my time gambling and drinking, wasting money I did not have. Then I met a woman in Santa Fe, thought I was in love, thought she felt the same." He paused, his jaw working. "She did not. She was working with a gang, using me to get information about payroll shipments. When I figured it out, I confronted her. She laughed at me, said I was stupid and easy to fool." "That is awful," Rosalie said softly. "I was stupid," Adler said. "But I learned. I left Santa Fe and started drifting. Took work where I could find it, tried to make up for lost time. And somewhere along the way I found I liked fixing things. It felt honest, straightforward. You see something broken, you make it work again. No lies, no complications." "Is that why you do not take payment?" He nodded. "Taking money makes it a transaction. Makes people feel like they owe me or I owe them. I like it better this way." Rosalie understood more than she could say. She, too, had learned the weight of obligations, the way people's help could come with invisible strings attached. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Why are you alone here?" Adler asked. "You said your father built this place. What happened to him?" "He died 2 years ago. Fever took him in the winter." Rosalie folded her hands in her lap. "I had no other family, no siblings. My mother died when I was young. Papa never remarried. He always said one great love was enough for any lifetime." "Were there no suitors? No one who wanted to court you?" Rosalie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "There was someone once, David Perry. We talked about marriage. But when my father got sick, when it became clear I would have nothing but this house and debt, he lost interest. Married Judith Morrison 6 months after my father died." Understanding dawned in Adler's eyes. "The woman who came to see you yesterday?" "Yes. She likes to remind me of what she has and what I lost." "Then she is a fool," Adler said with such conviction that Rosalie looked up in surprise. "You are worth 100 of her." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Rosalie's heart hammered in her chest. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Adler said quietly. "I see how hard you work, how you make do with so little and never complain. I see your kindness, bringing me food when you have barely enough for yourself. I see your strength, living alone out here and not asking anyone for help." He paused. "I see you, Rosalie." Tears pricked at her eyes. No one had truly seen her in so long, not since her father died. She had become invisible, just another poor woman struggling to survive at the edge of a dying town. "I see you too," she whispered. They finished the meal talking about easier things, about the town's history and the changing seasons, about the wildlife in the hills and the best places to fish in the creek. When the pie was eaten and the dishes cleared, Adler stood reluctantly. "I should go," he said. "Thank you for supper." "And for the company." "Thank you for fixing things," Rosalie said. "And for the company, too." At the door, he turned back. "Rosalie, I want you to know something. I am not planning to stay in Placerville forever. Drifting is what I do. But while I am here, I will make sure you are safe and cared for. That is a promise." The words should have disappointed her, should have been a warning to guard her heart. But somehow they felt honest in a way that promises of forever never had. "I understand," she said. "Thank you for being honest with me." He tipped his hat to her again, then disappeared into the darkness. Rosalie closed the door and leaned against it, her emotions a complicated tangle. She was drawn to Adler Nash in ways she had not anticipated, in ways that felt dangerous given his admission that he would not stay. But she could not bring herself to regret the connection forming between them, however temporary it might be. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Adler would work in the hills during the day, cutting and hauling timber for the woodshed. In the evenings, he would come to the house, and they would share supper together. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they sat in comfortable silence on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. He told her stories of his travels, of deserts and mountains and cities she had never seen. She told him about growing up in Placerville, about the town's wild gold rush days that she remembered only dimly from childhood. The woodshed took shape slowly, a sturdy structure that would keep her winter fuel dry. Adler worked with the focused intensity she had come to recognize in him, measuring twice and cutting once, fitting each board with care. She would bring him water during the day, and he would pause in his work to drink, his eyes following her as she returned to her own chores. The town's gossip continued, but Rosalie found she cared less and less. Martha Hensley assured her that not everyone believed the worst, that many people appreciated Adler's help around town. Old Samuel Winters had told anyone who would listen that the drifter was a good man who had fixed his roof better than it had been in 20 years. One afternoon, Rosalie was working in her small garden when she heard voices raised in anger from the direction of town. She straightened, shading her eyes, and saw a group of men standing outside the saloon. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in their postures. Worried, she set down her tools and walked toward town. As she drew closer, she could see Adler standing alone, facing 3 men. One of them was David Perry, her former suitor, and the other 2 were ranch hands who worked for Judith's father. "I am telling you to move along," David was saying, his voice loud and aggressive. "We do not need your kind here." "What kind would that be?" Adler's voice was calm, but Rosalie could hear the steel beneath it. "Drifters, troublemakers, men who take advantage of decent women." "I have not taken advantage of anyone," Adler said evenly. "That is not what I hear. I hear you have been spending a lot of time with Rosalie Durant. Everyone knows she is vulnerable, alone out there. You are taking advantage of her kindness." Rosalie felt fury surge through her. She quickened her pace, moving into the space between Adler and the 3 men. "How dare you," she said to David, her voice shaking with anger. "How dare you speak for me or claim to know what I need?" David's face flushed. "Rosalie, we are only looking out for you." "You lost the right to look out for me when you abandoned me for someone with a larger dowry," Rosalie shot back. "Adler has been nothing but respectful and helpful. He has fixed things around my property that have needed fixing for years, things you never offered to help with when we were courting." "That is different," David stammered. How is it different? Because he expects nothing in return, because he is actually kind without wanting something from me. She turned to look at Adler, who was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. This man has shown me more genuine respect and care in a few weeks than you did in 2 years. She turned back to David and the ranch hands. Leave him alone. Leave us both alone. What I do and who I spend time with is my own business. Without waiting for a response, she took Adler's arm and turned away, walking back toward her house with her head high. She could feel the eyes of the town on her back, could hear the whispers starting, but she did not care. She was done living according to other people's rules. They walked in silence until they reached her property. Only then did Adler speak. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did, Rosalie said firmly. David had no right to speak to you that way and no right to claim he was protecting me. You made an enemy today, Adler said quietly. Perry did not like being spoken to like that in front of others. He has been my enemy since he married Judith, Rosalie said. This changes nothing. Adler studied her face, and then something remarkable happened. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his features and made her heart leap. You are fierce, he said with something like wonder in his voice. I did not expect that. I am tired of being pushed around, Rosalie said. Tired of being made to feel small. You could never be small, Adler said. His hand came up, hesitating, then gently touched her cheek. You are the strongest person I have met. The touch sent warmth flooding through her. She leaned into his palm without thinking, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, Adler was looking at her with such intensity that she could not breathe. Rosalie, he said, her name a question. Yes, she whispered, though she did not know what she was agreeing to. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she did not want to pull away. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and searching, nothing like the clumsy kisses David had stolen during their courtship. This kiss felt like a promise, like coming home, like all the lonely years falling away in a single moment. When they parted, Adler rested his forehead against hers. I should not have done that, he said, but he did not sound sorry. I am glad you did, Rosalie replied. Her hands had found their way to his shirt front, clutching the fabric. I have wanted you to. I am still leaving eventually, he reminded her, but his voice lacked conviction. I know. She pulled back to look at him. But you are here now, cannot that be enough? He searched her face, and whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. For now, he agreed and kissed her again. From that day forward, something shifted between them. The connection that had been forming became undeniable, pulling them together with a force neither tried to resist. Adler still slept by the creek, still maintained the appearance of propriety, but everyone in town knew that something had changed. They were together in all the ways that mattered, even if no promises had been spoken. The woodshed was completed by the end of June. It stood sturdy and square, a testament to Adler's skill. He filled it with split wood, enough to see Rosalie through the winter and into the next spring. She protested that it was too much, but he waved away her concerns. I want to know you will be warm, he said simply. July brought heat to the foothills, the kind of dry heat that baked the earth and turned the grass golden. Rosalie continued her washing and mending, but business was slow. Several families had left Placerville, seeking opportunities in Sacramento or San Francisco. The town was dying by degrees, and everyone knew it. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Adler said, "Have you ever thought about leaving?" Rosalie considered the question. "Sometimes, but this is my home. It is all I have ever known." "What if you could go somewhere else? Somewhere with more opportunity?" She looked at him, trying to read his expression in the dim light. "Are you asking me to leave with you?" "I am asking if you would want to if the opportunity arose." Her heart beat faster. Where would we go? There is work in Sacramento. I heard they are expanding the railway lines, need carpenters and builders. I could get steady employment there. We could make a real life. We, Rosalie repeated softly. Adler turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. I know I said I was a drifter, that I would move on, but these past weeks with you have changed something in me. I do not want to drift anymore, Rosalie. I want to stay in one place. I want to build something real. He paused. I want to build it with you. Tears filled her eyes. Are you asking me to marry you? I am asking if you would consider it. I do not have much to offer right now, just my skills and my willingness to work hard. But I would spend every day trying to make you happy, trying to give you the life you deserve. I do not need much, Rosalie said, her voice thick with emotion. I just need you. Is that a yes? She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Adler pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were something precious and fragile. I will make you happy, he promised against her hair. I swear it. They sat together as the stars came out, making plans in soft voices. They would marry in Placerville, then sell the house and use the money to start fresh in Sacramento. It would not bring much, but it would be enough for a new beginning. Adler would find work, and Rosalie would continue taking in washing until they were stable enough for her to stop. The next morning, they went together to speak with Reverend Michaels, the elderly minister who had presided over the small church for 30 years. He agreed to marry them the following Sunday, his weathered face creasing into a smile as he shook Adler's hand and kissed Rosalie's cheek. I am glad to see you happy again, child, he told Rosalie. Your father would have been pleased. News of the engagement spread through town quickly. Martha Hensley gave Rosalie a length of blue fabric for a dress, refusing payment. Every bride needs something nice to wear, she said firmly. Other women, ones Rosalie had done washing for, offered small gifts: a pair of gloves, a comb for her hair, a bottle of lavender water. Judith Morrison and David Perry made their disapproval clear by their absence and silence, but Rosalie found she did not care. She had Adler, and she had a future to look forward to for the first time in years. The night before the wedding, Rosalie sat up late, stitching the final seam on her dress by lamplight. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, she found Adler standing there, his expression troubled. What is wrong? She asked immediately. Nothing is wrong, he said, but his voice was tight. I just needed to see you to make sure this is real. She pulled him inside, closing the door behind him. It is real. We are getting married tomorrow. I keep thinking you will change your mind, Adler admitted. That you will realize you could do better than a drifter with no family and no prospects. Rosalie cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. You are not a drifter anymore. You are the man I love, the man who fixes things, who works hard and treats me with respect. You are the man I choose, Adler, not because I have no other options, but because you are the one I want. You love me. His voice was barely a whisper. Yes, she said firmly. I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the morning I woke up to a fixed porch and realized someone had cared enough to help me without asking for anything in return. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her tightly. I love you too, he said into her hair. I have loved you since you marched up to me with that wrapped bread, all fierce and proud despite having so little. You were the bravest thing I had ever seen. They held each other for a long time, and when Adler finally left to return to his camp, Rosalie felt more certain than ever that she was making the right choice. The wedding day dawned clear and warm. Rosalie dressed in her new blue gown, pinned up her hair, and tucked a few wildflowers behind her ear. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the glowing woman staring back at her. She looked happy, she realized. truly happy for the first time in years. The ceremony was small, held in the church with perhaps 20 people in attendance. Martha and Ben Hensley were there, along with Samuel Winters and a handful of other townspeople who had come to wish them well. Reverend Michaels led them through their vows, his voice strong and sure despite his age. When Adler slipped a simple gold band onto Rosalie's finger, she had to blink back tears. The ring had belonged to his mother, he had told her the night before, the only thing of value he still possessed. She had protested, but he insisted, saying his mother would have wanted her to have it. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Michaels declared. "You may kiss your bride." Adler pulled Rosalie close and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of their small audience. When they parted, both were grinning like fools. They held a modest reception in the churchyard, with cake that Martha had baked and lemonade served in borrowed glasses. People came up to offer congratulations and well wishes. Even a few people who had been skeptical of Adler seemed won over by the obvious happiness of the couple. As the sun began to set, Adler and Rosalie walked back to the house, now their house together for this final night in Placerville. Tomorrow they would begin the journey to Sacramento, but tonight belonged only to them. Inside, Adler picked Rosalie up and carried her over the threshold, making her laugh with the old-fashioned gesture. He set her down gently in the middle of the small room, then pulled her back into his arms. "Hello, wife," he said softly. "Hello, husband," she replied and kissed him. The night was tender and sweet, two lonely people finding solace and joy in each other at last. When Rosalie finally fell asleep in Adler's arms, she felt safer and more content than she could ever remember feeling. They left Placerville 3 days later, their few possessions loaded into a wagon Adler had purchased with the money from selling Rosalie's house. The sale had brought more than expected, as a family moving in from the east had been desperate for housing. It was enough to give them a cushion while they established themselves in Sacramento. The journey took 2 days on the rough roads. They camped the first night under the stars, and Adler told Rosalie more stories of his travels. She listened, fascinated by this life so different from her own. The second day brought them into Sacramento as the sun was setting, the city sprawling and busy compared to sleepy Placerville. They found a boarding house that rented rooms by the week and settled in while Adler looked for work. It took only 3 days for him to find a position with a construction company building new commercial buildings along J Street. The pay was steady and better than he had expected, and the foreman had been impressed by his skills. Rosalie found work as well, taking in laundry from the wealthier families who had settled in the growing city. It was hard work, but no harder than what she had been doing, and there was more of it. Within a month, they had saved enough to rent a small house on the outskirts of the city, a modest place with 2 rooms and a yard where Rosalie could plant a garden. Life settled into a new rhythm. Adler would leave before dawn to work on the construction sites, returning home as the sun set, tired but satisfied. Rosalie would spend her days washing and mending, and in the evenings they would have supper together and talk about their days. It was simple and ordinary and more wonderful than either of them had imagined. 3 months after their arrival in Sacramento, Rosalie realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then told Adler one evening as they sat together after supper. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Adler went very still, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. It is still early, but all the signs are there." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "How do you feel about it?" "Scared," Rosalie admitted. "But happy too." "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Adler said honestly. "But yes, I am happy, so happy I can barely speak." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, his hands cradling her face. "We are going to have a family," he said wonderingly. "A real family." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rosalie continued working as long as she could, and Adler took on extra jobs in the evenings, building furniture and doing repairs for neighbors to earn additional money. They saved carefully, preparing for the baby's arrival. In March of 1879, after a long night of labor, Rosalie gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Rosalie's father. Adler held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face, and Rosalie knew she had never seen him look so happy. The first months were difficult, as all new parents find them. Thomas was colicky and slept poorly, and Rosalie was exhausted from nursing and caring for him. But Adler was patient and helpful, taking the baby whenever he could to let Rosalie rest. He would walk the floors at night, bouncing Thomas and singing off-key lullabies, and Rosalie would watch from the bed with love overflowing her heart. As Thomas grew, their little family found its rhythm. Adler was promoted at his work, put in charge of a crew of his own. The raise in pay allowed them to move to a larger house, one with 3 rooms and a proper kitchen. Rosalie scaled back her washing work, taking in only enough to contribute while focusing on caring for Thomas. When Thomas was 2 years old, Rosalie found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she was sick for the first several months. Adler worried constantly, hovering over her until she had to shoo him away. But his concern came from love, and she could not truly be annoyed. Their second son, called Robert after Adler's father, was born in November of 1881. He was an easier baby than Thomas had been, content to nurse and sleep and watch the world with calm, dark eyes. Thomas adjusted to his new brother with the resilience of a young child, though he sometimes climbed into his parents' bed at night, seeking reassurance that he was still loved. The years passed in a blur of work and growth and small joys. The boys grew strong and healthy, learning to walk and talk and get into mischief. Adler built them toys and told them stories, and Rosalie taught them their letters and numbers. They were not wealthy, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. One evening, when Thomas was 6 and Robert 4, Rosalie stood in the doorway of their house watching her family. Adler was in the yard teaching the boys how to hammer nails into scrap wood, all 3 of them focused intently on the task. The setting sun painted everything gold, and in that moment, Rosalie felt such profound gratitude that it brought tears to her eyes. Adler looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, that same transformative smile that still made her heart skip, and mouthed the words, "I love you." She mouthed them back, then went to join her family in the golden evening light. As the boys grew older, Adler told them stories of their parents' meeting, though he edited out some of the harder parts. He told them about Placerville and the porch he had fixed one night, about their mother's bravery in standing up for him, about the decision to start fresh in Sacramento. "Your mother is the strongest person I know," he would say, and the boys would nod seriously, because they could see the truth of it themselves. Thomas showed an early aptitude for building, following his father around job sites when Adler would take him on weekends. Robert was quieter, more studious, with a love of reading that surprised them both. Rosalie would take him to the library that had opened downtown, and he would emerge with armfuls of books that he would devour in days. When Thomas was 10 and Robert 8, a letter arrived from Placerville. It was from Martha Hensley, now quite elderly, writing to tell them that Judith Perry had died in childbirth, along with the baby. David Perry, she wrote, had left town shortly after, and no one knew where he had gone. Rosalie read the letter aloud to Adler that evening after the boys were in bed. "I should feel something," she said. "Sadness, at least. We knew each other as children, but I feel nothing except relief that she cannot hurt anyone anymore." "She was not kind to you," Adler said gently. "You do not have to mourn her. It feels wrong, though, to feel nothing." Adler pulled her into his arms. "You feel nothing because you have moved past that part of your life. She has no power over you anymore. That is not wrong, Rosalie. That is healing." She held on to him, grateful as always for his wisdom and steadiness. He had kept his promise, made on their wedding day, to try to make her happy every day. And he had succeeded beyond what either of them could have imagined. In 1886, when Rosalie was 30 years old, she found herself pregnant once more. She had thought her childbearing years were finished, but nature had other plans. This pregnancy was the hardest yet, and the doctor cautioned her to rest as much as possible. Adler was beside himself with worry, insisting she stop all work immediately. The boys, now 12 and 10, took on extra chores to help, bringing their mother tea and reading to her in the afternoons. The whole family rallied around her, their love a tangible force. In December, a month before her expected due date, Rosalie went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when the doctor looked worried. But Rosalie was, as Adler always said, the strongest person he knew. After 16 hours, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Alina, after Adler's mother. She was tiny but fierce, wailing her displeasure at the world with impressive volume. Thomas and Robert were instantly smitten, fighting over who got to hold her first. Adler held his daughter with the same wonder he had shown when holding his sons for the first time. "We have a girl," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I have a daughter." "We have a daughter," Rosalie corrected, exhausted but smiling. "What do you think?" "I think I am the luckiest man alive," Adler said, carefully placing Alina in Rosalie's arms. He kissed his wife's forehead gently. "Thank you for her. Thank you for all of this." Alina proved to be as strong-willed as her mother and as patient as her father. She grew up adored by her older brothers, who taught her how to climb trees and catch frogs, much to Rosalie's pretended dismay. Adler built her a dollhouse with his own hands, complete with tiny furniture, and she would play with it for hours, creating elaborate stories. By 1890, Sacramento had grown into a thriving city. Adler's construction company had done well, and he had been made a partner. They moved into a larger house on a tree-lined street, with a parlor and a dining room and bedrooms for each of the children. It was far beyond anything Rosalie had imagined in those hard days in Placerville, and sometimes she would walk through the rooms just marveling at how far they had come. Thomas, now 16, had begun working with his father, learning the construction trade. He was good with his hands and had his father's eye for detail. Robert, 14, had earned a scholarship to attend a private school, where he excelled in mathematics and literature. Alina, at 4, ruled the household with her cheerful demands and infectious laughter. One evening, as Rosalie and Adler sat on the porch of their new house, watching their children play in the yard, Adler took her hand. "You ever think about that morning in Placerville?" he asked. "When you found the fixed porch?" "All the time," Rosalie said. "I think about how different my life might have been if you had not come to town, if you had not decided to help without asking for anything." "I was lost before I found you," Adler said quietly, "drifting without purpose. You gave me a reason to stay in one place. You gave me a home." "We gave each other a home," Rosalie corrected. She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Adler Nash, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." He smiled, that same beautiful smile that still made her heart race after all these years. "I love you too, Rosalie Nash. forever. As the sun set over Sacramento, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, their children's laughter filled the air. Thomas was teaching Robert how to throw a ball, while Alina chased after them, demanding to be included. It was chaotic and noisy and absolutely perfect. The years continued to pass, marked by milestones and changes. Thomas married at 21, a sweet girl named Catherine who worked in her father's store. They had their first child, a son, a year later, making Rosalie and Adler grandparents for the first time. Rosalie wept when she held her grandson, overwhelmed by the continuation of their family line. Robert finished his schooling and became a teacher, passionate about education and helping children learn. He married at 25, a fellow teacher named Margaret, and they settled in a small house near the school where they both taught. Alina grew into a beautiful and spirited young woman. She had inherited her mother's determination and her father's kind heart. When she was 18, she announced her intention to attend the new women's college that had opened in San Francisco. Adler was proud but worried about his little girl moving away. Rosalie assured him that Alina would be fine, that she had raised her to be strong and independent. In 1898, Rosalie and Adler celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a party, inviting friends and family to celebrate. The house was filled with people and laughter, and when Rosalie looked around at all the lives they had touched, all the love they had created, she felt her heart might burst. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Adler led Rosalie upstairs to their bedroom. He had a surprise for her, he said, something he had been working on for months. He presented her with a painting, beautifully framed. It showed a small house with a fixed porch, a cowboy's silhouette in the distance, and a young woman standing in the doorway, her hand shading her eyes as she looked toward him. The colors were soft and nostalgic, capturing a moment that had changed both their lives forever. "When did you have this done?" Rosalie asked, tears streaming down her face. "I described it to an artist friend," Adler said. "I wanted to capture that moment, the beginning of us, so we would never forget where we started." Rosalie threw her arms around him, holding him tight. "I could never forget, not a single moment." They hung the painting in their bedroom where they could see it every day. It became a touchstone for them, a reminder of the journey they had taken together. The new century brought changes. Adler retired from active construction work at 55, though he still consulted on projects and taught younger workers. Rosalie finally stopped taking in any washing at all, spending her time instead with her growing number of grandchildren. Thomas and Catherine had given them 4 grandchildren. Robert and Margaret had 3, and Alina, who had married a professor she met in San Francisco, had 2. Their house was always full of noise and activity when the grandchildren visited. Adler would build things with them in his workshop, teaching them the skills his own father had taught him. Rosalie would bake with them in the kitchen, passing down her mother's recipes and her father's stories. One spring afternoon in 1905, Rosalie was working in her garden when she felt a pain in her chest. She sat down heavily on the bench Adler had built, breathing carefully until it passed. She said nothing about it to Adler, not wanting to worry him. But the pains came more frequently over the following weeks, and finally she confessed. The doctor's examination revealed that her heart was weak, damaged perhaps by the difficult birth of Alina all those years ago. There was nothing to be done, he said gently. She should rest, avoid strain, and make the most of the time she had. Rosalie took the news with calm acceptance. She was 49 years old and she had lived a full and happy life. But Adler was devastated. "You cannot leave me," he said that night, holding her in their bed. "I do not know how to exist without you. You will not have to, Not for a long time yet, Rosalie soothed, though she was less certain than she sounded. The doctor said I could have years still if I am careful. And she did have more time, precious years that they both knew to treasure. They took walks together in the evenings, moving slowly and stopping often to rest. They sat on their porch and watched the sunset, holding hands in comfortable silence. They told each other stories of their life together, remembering and laughing and sometimes crying. Rosalie saw Elena graduate from college and establish herself as a teacher alongside her husband. She saw Thomas's oldest son begin working in his father's construction business, the third generation to follow in Adler's footsteps. She held each of her grandchildren and told them stories of the old days, of Placerville and fixed porches and the cowboy who had stolen her heart. In the fall of 1910, as the leaves turned gold and red, Rosalie's condition worsened. She spent most days in bed now, her breath coming short and her energy fleeting. But she insisted on being propped up by pillows so she could see out the window, watch the changing seasons. Adler rarely left her side. Their children visited daily, bringing the grandchildren to sit quietly by their grandmother's bed. Rosalie would stroke their hair and tell them she loved them, her voice growing weaker but her love as strong as ever. One evening in late October, as the sun set in brilliant orange and pink, Rosalie asked Adler to lie down beside her. He did, carefully arranging himself so he would not jostle her. "You remember the first time I kissed you?" Rosalie asked softly. "I kissed you," Adler corrected, his voice rough with unshed tears. "You are right. You kissed me after I defended you against David Perry. I was so angry that day." "You were magnificent," Adler said. "You have been magnificent every day since." "We had a good life, did we not?" Rosalie asked. "The best life," Adler confirmed. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed." "And you fixed my porch," Rosalie said with a faint smile, "and my door and my chicken coop, and my heart." Adler pressed his face against her hair, his body shaking with suppressed sobs. "I love you," he said. "I will always love you. I know," Rosalie whispered. "I will always love you too, in this life and whatever comes after." She fell asleep in his arms as the last light faded from the sky. Sometime during the night her breathing changed, became shallow and irregular. Adler woke and held her closer, whispering his love over and over. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Rosalie Durant Nash took her last breath, surrounded by love and at peace. The funeral was held on a beautiful autumn day, the sky clear and blue. All three of their children spoke, sharing memories of their mother's strength and kindness. Adler sat in the front pew, his face carved from stone, his eyes hollow with grief. The months that followed were the darkest of Adler's life. He had spent 32 years with Rosalie, and without her, the world felt colorless and empty. His children tried to help, but grief was a journey he had to take alone. He found solace in his workshop, building things with his hands as he had always done. He built a cradle for Thomas's newest grandchild, his great-grandson. He built a bookshelf for Robert's library. He built a jewelry box for Elena, carving roses into the lid because Rosalie had loved roses. Slowly, painfully, he learned to live with her absence. He visited her grave every week, bringing fresh flowers and telling her about their children and grandchildren. He looked at the painting of the porch every night before bed, remembering the woman who had stood in that doorway and changed his life forever. 3 years after Rosalie's death, Adler was sitting on his porch when Thomas came to visit. "Papa, we need to talk about something," Thomas said, settling into the chair beside his father. "What is it? You are 60 years old. You are healthy and strong, and you have many more years ahead of you. But you spend all your time alone, working in your shop or visiting Mama's grave." "That is how I want to spend my time," Adler said quietly. "I know you loved Mama. We all did. But she would not want you to shut yourself away like this. She would want you to live, to be with your family, to find joy again." Adler was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know how to find joy without her." "Then let us help you," Thomas said. "Come to Sunday dinners. Spend time with your grandchildren. Let us back into your life, Papa. Please." Adler looked at his son, seeing Rosalie's determination in his eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. Thomas was right. Rosalie would not have wanted this for him. She had lived every day fully, squeezing joy from even the hardest moments. He owed it to her memory to do the same. "All right," he said. "I will try." And he did try. He went to Sunday dinners and told stories to his grandchildren. He taught his great-grandchildren how to build things, passing down the skills and the love of craftsmanship. He planted a rose garden in Rosalie's memory, tending it carefully and bringing bouquets to her grave. Adler lived another 15 years, surrounded by the family he and Rosalie had created. He never remarried, never even considered it. Rosalie had been his one great love, and that was enough for any lifetime. On a warm May evening in 1925, 3 months after his 72nd birthday, Adler Nash died peacefully in his sleep. His children found him the next morning, a slight smile on his face, his hand resting on the pillow beside him as though reaching for someone. They buried him next to Rosalie, under a large oak tree. The headstone they placed bore both their names and a simple inscription. Together they built a life of love. Eleanor, now a grandmother herself, stood at the grave after the funeral had ended and the other mourners had left. She thought about her parents, about the stories they had told of fixing porches and falling in love in a dying mining town. She thought about the painting that hung in the house, about the way her father had looked at her mother even after decades of marriage, as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," she whispered to the graves, "for showing us what love looks like, for teaching us to be strong and kind and brave." A warm breeze stirred the leaves of the oak tree, and Eleanor felt, just for a moment, the presence of her parents. Not gone, she realized, never truly gone. They lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the houses Adler had built and the gardens Rosalie had planted, in the stories told and the love shared. The Nash family continued to grow and flourish. Thomas's great-grandchildren told their children about the drifter Cowboy who had fixed a porch in the night and fallen in love with a brave woman. The painting was passed down through generations, a treasured heirloom that reminded them all of where they came from. And sometimes, on quiet mornings in the towns and cities where the Nash descendants lived, someone would wake to find a small repair done in the night, a squeaking hinge oiled or a loose board nailed down. And they would smile, thinking of Adler Nash, who had taught his children and grandchildren that love meant fixing things without asking for recognition, helping without expectation of reward, and building something lasting from nothing but care and dedication. The love story of Rosalie and Adler became a family legend, told and retold, changing slightly with each telling but always holding the same essential truth. That sometimes love comes quietly, in the form of a fixed porch and oiled hinges, offered by someone who expects nothing in return. And that when two lonely souls find each other, they can build something beautiful that lasts far beyond their own lives, touching generation after generation with the power of their devotion. The house in Sacramento, where they had raised their family, stood for another 40 years before being torn down to make way for a modern building. But before it was demolished, Eleanor's daughter went through it one last time, finding the painting carefully wrapped in cloth in the attic. She took it home and hung it in her own house, where her children and grandchildren would see it and ask about the people in it. And so the story continued, passed down through the years, a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. That love does not always announce itself with fanfare, but sometimes arrives in the quiet hours of the night, working silently to make things better. That a fixed porch can be the foundation of a life built together, and oiled hinges can swing open doors to happiness that neither person knew existed. In the end, what Adler and Rosalie built together was not just a family or a life, but a legacy of love that would endure as long as their descendants remembered the story of a drifter cowboy and a brave woman who met in a dying California mining town and chose to build something beautiful together, one fixed board at a time.